Swachemi, in your own simple way, particularly because you have experience in domestic violence, how would you define gender-based violence?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. It's an honor to be part of this all-important forum. When we talk about gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence, it simply means any act that is perpetrated against a person's will and is normally based on gender norms and unequal power relationships. Normally, it has to do with power and control and the various categories that the society has defined, has put women and men. For instance, society defines the different roles that women and men are supposed to play. And in defining those different roles, it contributes to gender-based violence. So what happens is that women suffer certain crimes, certain abuses because they are women, period. It comes in different forms. We have SGBV coming in different forms. And it takes the forms of human trafficking, it takes the form of FGM, female genital mutilation, it takes the form of domestic violence, early forced marriage, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and sexual abuse could include rape, attempted rape, defilement, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Well, we've recently learned the forms in which gender-based violence come about. And talking about gender-based violence, one of our panels, which is lawyer Isobel Afo-Mensah, we know that you're a founder of Lady Initiative. Lady Initiative is aimed towards holistic empowerment of young ladies. We also understand that you are currently handling a project, Pearl Safe Haven, to build sort of a shelter for victims of gender-based violence. Can you please help us give us an focus on this project, which is with regards to your outfit, Pearl Safe Haven, and how it is connected to gender-based violence? Madam Isobel Afo-Mensah.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you guys for having us on the call today. So we started building a shelter or refuge for survivors of gender-based violence. And just to also say that we tend to use the word survivors rather than victims. Part of what we want to do and supporting Chief Superintendent's team is to ensure that we even change the narrative, that we change the way we even talk about things in this area. So we use the word survivor rather than victim. It's a lot more empowering. But one of the things we realized in the sector is that you don't really have many shelters, so places that women tend to be obviously the biggest number of survivors, but you do have some male survivors as well. But when we speak, we're largely speaking about women and children. You don't have a lot of places that women can go to, and that really hinders progress in this sector. So where a woman doesn't have a place of escape to really understand what they're going through and process and maybe pursue legal action or deal with medical issues, they stay in the place of abuse. So our team is focused on generally, changing the narrative of gender-based violence in Ghana, but our primary core is to support other advocates in the sector by building the safe haven. And the idea is when a woman is in a difficult situation, they would go through DOFSU. So they would call, Ghana Police, DOFSU, and we would liaise with DOFSU for the woman to be housed at the safe haven. We are building it as a haven rather than an emergency shelter. So if you look in other countries, you'll have an emergency shelter that is somewhere that somebody can stay for about 3 days, sometimes even just overnight. But our model is a little different. We want to focus on building a haven where the woman, the survivor, can come to and actually have 3 months up to 3 months for them to stay there to really fully rehabilitate. Because gender violence is not just the physical acts, there's a lot of emotional trauma that also has to be dealt with. And the idea is to enable that woman to have a space for them to go through the process, and also to identify an area that they want to pursue. Many times, the way we look at gender violence is that it's an interruption of somebody's life. So these are women who have dreams, ambitions, plans, jobs, etc. And the violence comes in to bring a form of interruption. And so the idea is during the 3 months is to enable them to successfully leave the safe haven and to be able to thrive after that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lawyer Isobel. Wow, that's really refreshing. And another question for Lawyer Fatimata. I know Sierra Leone has had its own share of turbulent times, having come through a process of conflict and then being hit hard with the Ebola virus. Right after that, the COVID-19 pandemic hits Sierra Leone again. So I'd like to know from the Sierra Leonean narrative, how exactly has the Ebola virus phenomena aided in the management of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly for the country Sierra Leone?
Okay, so that's a good question to ask. The good thing is with the Ebola pandemic, which was a sporadic incident the same way as the COVID-19, we had structures that we could rely on insofar as manpower, skills, and all the rest of it. So those structures were there, but we had problems. The problems were mainly resources. The resources were not there to maintain those structures so that they will be fully functional and efficient, so much so that we could pick up from if we have another outbreak or another pandemic. So there were lessons learned, but the lessons learned were not fully successfully utilized because of the lack of structures, and we'd lost personnel and resources because there's migration and movement across the country, and there's being a political change. So all of that has its own effect on us. But insofar as its effect on women, we've never had a situation where women have been the focal point of any crisis. It's been seen as if these crises affect everybody, regardless of the gender.
Okay.
So we never had a conversation with Ebola on its effect on women. We're only discussing the effect of COVID-19 on women now because it's become a universal problem, and it's because people are raising some of these issues with respect to the effect on women. So it's a good step, but lessons learned and structures, we still had lots of gaps that have to be filled in.
Sure. And I appreciate the fact that you talk about it from a global perspective. And I believe Madam Diane Kay can help us talk about that global perspective as a postgraduate student from in the US. Can you tell us some of the challenges that you have faced personally, Ms. Diane Kay, with regards to your encounter, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic? Have you had any peculiar challenges as an international postgraduate student, particularly in the US during the pandemic?
Thank you very much for your question. And it's a privilege to be here with my fellow panelists. So I would say that international students face a unique, we face unique problems during the coronavirus pandemic. So there was a situation of how schools were all shutting down. So fortunately for me, I was a postgraduate student, so I was in an apartment. But so many undergraduate students who were international students, so basically Africa, etc., they were being driven off campus, and they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have anybody to go to, and it was actually a really, really big issue. So now I don't know how some of them were able to combat the issue, but one will be the fact that schools were closing down and people didn't have anywhere to go. I was fortunate enough to have an apartment, but not everybody had the same thing. Another issue was, most of the times when you're doing your postgraduate degree, most of the jobs on campus are done by postgraduate students and undergraduate students. because that's a way to like support yourself as you're in school. But here's a case when our schools are shutting down. So all the jobs like Starbucks, working at Dunkin' Donuts, working at like different campus jobs that people are using to support themselves, all of these things got shut down. So now there was no funding for apartments, there was no funding for food. People didn't know how they were going to even keep up with their rent. It was honestly like a whole mess. I mean, the schools tried to mitigate it by providing funds that you could apply for, but at the most you could get was a 1 month rent off or something. That wasn't even substantial enough. Like there were so many issues, but most of it was financial, and the fact that international students didn't have anybody advocating for us or helping us during this time.
Wow. Wow, that's quite interesting. And I have a follow-up question for you, Madam Diane. So is there anything that the Ghanaian government or perhaps the home countries of these international students to assist in these really troubling times? Or perhaps did the US government try to help mitigate, apart from the aid that the schools tried to support these international students with?
So the US government only did their bit to help American citizens. They were providing stimulus checks only to American citizens. Um, there were some other international countries like Sweden. I had colleagues from Sweden, Norway, the other European countries who their governments organized literally flights for the students to get them all back to the country when everything happened. The Ghana government, we didn't hear anything from them. Like we didn't have anybody reaching out asking how are you guys doing. So I even reached out to my colleagues in London asking them, and they said that all they received was a flyer coming around asking them to register if they are international students and they are facing financial difficulties or any difficulties. But even after that, we still didn't receive anything. We still didn't hear anything back from them. Like there was no reaching out done. There was nobody trying to give you money or anything. Nothing.
Ms. K?
Yes.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. And wow. Well, before we continue with this conversation, I'd like to add that if you have any questions, you can drop it on our feed, our live feed on Facebook, or you can also drop it on the interface on Zoom. My colleague, my co-moderator, Ms. Maida Kluche, will take that session right after the discussion is done. And then we will go into the question and answer session, and then our honorable panel will help us answer some of your questions. My next question goes to Chief Superintendent Owusu Atreme. I wouldn't want to assume purposely, and for the purpose of today's discussion, that there's been a surge of domestic violence or any form of gender-based violence, especially during this pandemic. I believe your outfit would be able to give us a reportage on how exactly the whole reaction with regards to the reportage on domestic violence and gender-based violence of any form for that matter has been. Has there really been a surge or not? Perhaps you would be able to tell us whether or not there has been any surge, increase or not of gender-based violence, particularly in the time of our lockdown in the entire global pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much. As I indicated earlier on in the definition of LGBT, human trafficking is also an aspect of LGBT. And so I am going to restrict myself in this situation on domestic violence because the human trafficking aspect falls under a different unit. Okay. So I'm able to talk broadly on LGBT, but I'm going to talk about the domestic violence. And in Ghana, yes, there's enough statistics. There's data to show that there was an increase in domestic violence in Europe and other countries. Here in Ghana, fortunately, during the lockdown period, we did not record an increase in domestic violence cases in the lockdown areas. I would like to remind our panelists and listeners that the lockdown in the case of Ghana was more of restrictions and not total lockdown. And then secondly, it was also restricted to certain areas like Greater Kumasi, Greater Accra, Kasua, and some, and it's and Tema, it includes Tema, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't a total lockdown. It was more of restrictions. As a result, within the lockdown period, we recorded 667 cases. But that is not to say that all these cases were domestic violence cases that took place during the lockdown. These were cases that were reported that took place before the lockdown. Now, when you break down the cases, for instance, in Greater Accra region, there was we recorded a total number of 464 cases. In Tema region, we had 125 cases. And then Greater Kumasi, 59 cases, Kasua, 19 cases. Now, the total, which is 667, we had only 32 cases that were linked to the restrictions. And so what we did in trying to, in analyzing and trying to draw the public's attention to the fact that we did not have an increase in domestic violence cases, we tried to compare the duration of the restriction to previous years. The same period, what cases did we record, so that at least we can have an objective analysis of the statistics. Because if you say, oh, there was no increase, on what basis are you saying there's no increase? You need to compare it against a certain background. So what we did was to compare the same duration between 2016 and 2020. The same period. And then we realized that the number, for instance, I'll give you just some rough statistics. For instance, in 2016, during the same period under consideration, which is the lockdown period started from, I think 30th to April. No, 23rd April. Let me just be sure. Let me keep, I'll get the exact date, but it was between March and April. Now, so we look at the statistics in the same period. And in 2016, we recorded 1,270 cases. During the same period, we had, for 2017, we had 1,488. 2018, we had 1,268 cases, and 2019, we had 1,509 cases. Whilst within the same period, we had 667 cases. So the lockdown period was 30th March to 20th April. That was the lockdown period. So within this period, when you compare 2016, the same period, 30th March to 20th April, up to 2020, you realize that 2020 recorded the least of cases within the lockdown period. Now, within that 667, we recorded 31 cases in all, 4 cases related to the COVID. And if you look at the breakdown of the cases, it had to do, we recorded 18 cases under non-maintenance, recorded 6 cases under assault, emotional abuse, we had 2 cases, verbal abuse, recorded 2 cases, threat of death was 1. We had 1 case for threat of harm, unlawful ejection 1, causing unlawful damage, also recorded 1 case. So in summary, here in Ghana, during the lockdown period, there was no increase in domestic violence here in Ghana. That does not mean that it is conclusive for the rest of the year or for as long as the pandemic is here. As I keep saying, the pandemic is still here with us. And so we are still monitoring, because the pandemic definitely affects the economy of every country. And so once people begin to lose their jobs, if there are no interventions here and there, then it will trigger some form of abuse in one way or the other in the various homes. But within the lockdown period, this is what we had.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. But well, I believe if with regards to the records that you have, it is as a result of those that have been recorded. How about those that may have not been recorded? Perhaps you wouldn't be able to tell us because you wouldn't know because it wasn't reported, but could there be a reason why within this particular period, there is a possibility that there wasn't a surge because perhaps that reportage wasn't done? People didn't report those issues. It wasn't because it was devoid of it happening. Perhaps it happened, but then it wasn't reported. Could there be a reason to the people not reporting that experience?
Under normal circumstances, it's not everybody reports, any form of abuse he or she goes through. So what therefore means that even in normal times, not everybody will report domestic violence cases. So it is not an exceptional case when it comes to COVID. So we cannot simply say because it's COVID time, people did not report. So if we did not record an increase in domestic violence cases, it's because people did not report. No, in normal times, we don't have everybody reporting cases for various reasons. People have reasons why they don't report abuses that they go through. Either they are not aware that it's even an abuse to begin with, or they feel it's a family issue, or they are afraid that if they come, their marriages will be destroyed, they will be divorced, their husbands or partners will divorce them, or sometimes family pressure. There are a lot of reasons why people may not report in normal times. So yes, in COVID time, people have argued that probably it's because of the restrictions. And my argument has always been that, yes, there were restrictions and not total lockdown. The restrictions were such that if you were an essential worker, you could still go out and work. If you were selling in the market, you could still go there and sell, especially when you're selling food stuff and all that. People who were selling food by the roadside were still going to sell food anywhere. What is my point? My point is that if somebody who during the lockdown was an essential worker or was still going out to work, was suffering was being abused in one way or the other, still had the option of reporting to the police. What therefore this means is that if a person did not report, it could be that the person wouldn't have reported under normal circumstances. So the issue of restriction, because in Europe, it was locked down to the extent that in some countries that I am aware, before you go out to buy provisions or essentials, you need to have documentation. Here in Ghana, it wasn't so. Here in Ghana, you could move out, even if you want to buy food for daily, whatever, you could still go out. So within that period, and there were police patrol teams moving around during the COVID time. And so access to police was not something that was difficult to, it wasn't like it was difficult to have access to police. So based on this, and from what we have gathered, we will still stand by the fact that during the restrictions between the 30th March to 20th April, there was no increase in domestic violence.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification, Chief Superintendent. My next question would be for Madam Fatimata, Lawyer Fatimata, sorry. We want to digress a bit to the economic challenges on women. So, Madam Fatimata, I believe you will be able to better help us talk about how exactly Sierra Leone has been able to help mitigate the question of equality with regards to the economic rights or the access to economic employment, particularly for women. Have there been any disparity with regards to access to jobs even before COVID-19? And how has the government of Sierra Leone helped in mitigating or perhaps bridging that gap or that dichotomy with regards to women's access to employment opportunities?
Okay, so thank you again. We've always had an imbalance when it comes to access to employment. Hello? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, please.
Okay, great, thank you. So we've always had that imbalance when it comes to employment opportunities, economic empowerment, and all of that. So there's always been advocacy centered around economic empowerment and creating employment opportunities for women, putting more women in governance, making sure women are in leadership, and all the rest of it. So in 2016, there was an act that was passed under the Finance Act and the budget, wherein to motivate companies to put women in places of authority, we had a percentage, 6.5% tax break to companies that had women in leadership. We'd also been clamoring for the quota system, which is 30% representation in parliament and in governance. We're still not getting the quota system, we're struggling for it. But we need to put into perspective the fact that as women, the kinds of jobs we do are at odds most of the time, because like housekeeping and cooking and all of these cleaning jobs, these are predominantly jobs that women take up. And the effect on those women during the pandemic was grave, because with the pandemic and all the lockdown, it meant either of two things: that you had to abandon your work because you had to protect your family first, or you preserve your job and abandon your family temporarily to make sure you make ends meet. In most cases, you have a situation where women are the breadwinners, and the challenge became what options were left to them when there was a shutdown or when the economic opportunities are limited, noting the expense, inflation, and all the rest of it. So the issues of gender inequalities when it comes to job had been prevalent even before the COVID-19. And then COVID-19 came, the hotel and tourism collapsed, the aviation industry shut down. So you can imagine the trickle effect it had all the way down. And people were just scared to be around each other. And these hesitations resulted in people deciding to let go or lay off their workers. We don't have a scheme wherein unemployed people can go and claim benefits or claim support or checks at the end of every month to see them through. And most people live paycheck by paycheck. So you can imagine when the pandemic hit and there was no notice, and then you had all of this. Luckily for us in Sierra Leone, our lockdowns were not as intense as in Ghana. At most, we had sessions of 3 days lockdown, and we went back to some form of movement. So the lockdown was not entirely restricted. However, there were curfews. You had to be home by 6 o'clock when there was no lockdown. And then there were issues with respect to how you relate, what were interpersonal skills when it came to the COVID and curbing the spread of COVID. So the impacts are there. So it had compounded the situation because most homes have parents who are unemployed now. And so those people who are skilled or trained workers or untrained workers working in those homes cannot be maintained. The primary good number of them are women. So we haven't done an assessment yet on the state of unemployment that COVID brought, but we had already been contending with that issue. And then we had inter-district lockdown, which meant you could not move from one district or one town to the other. And most of women in Sierra Leone are traders. They go from one district to the other to trade. And that also in itself became a challenge and an issue to contend with. So with all these restrictions, the boundary closures, wherein people can go across the border to Conakry, Guinea, or Liberia to carry out their business, the women who were business women dissipated their financials, their budgets and everything that they had. And so now, even with all the reopening that's happening, even though slow pace, there's nowhere to turn. They don't have anything to start with. So these are the contentions. Women are generally just prejudiced when these issues come up.
Oh, interesting. So, well, with regards to, we're going back to gender-based violence, have there been any unusual surge with regards to gender-based violence? We are digressing a bit from the economic aspect because we wanted to focus on the fact that the impacts were not only with regards to gender-based violence, but also there may be economic impact. But then if we're going to that physical and the psychological impact, with regards to gender-based violence, would you be able to give us perhaps some sort of impact that the COVID-19 pandemic may have had, particularly on women, other than the economic aspect?
We had a situation wherein with the lockdown and the COVID, what became very clear was that the numbers were not as high because there was restrictions of movement and limitations, but all the incidents of violence that happened were within the homes. So it raised a concern that we observe that when people are within a particular space, closed down with limitations and restrictions, there's a spike in violence. And then we realized that it moved to a certain class. We got more complaints from the middle class of women who suffered abuse within the homes because basically they were locked up in a home wherein on a normal day, everybody goes their own way and they come out at night and probably they're tired, but there's no violence. On a normal day, they've gone out, they have something to come home with to eat and feed the children. But with the children crying that they want food and probably the mother not being able to provide and asking the father for help, it became a challenge. As such, there was violence. So there was internal domestic spike in violence. But insofar as general gender-based violence that happens across, we haven't seen the numbers risen because there were limitations insofar as restrictions. But the other thing that came out was the issues relating to sexual reproductive health and rights. When we had a lockdown, mind wasn't paid to the fact that you might have pregnant women who need movement and what numbers would they call it they need movement. Mind wasn't paid to the fact that you had women who would go into their menstrual cycle and they might not have the necessary equipment to protect themselves. You had women who were on the preventive pill, contraception, and it was during that 3 days lockdown that we had that they needed to renew their contraception. And so these are all issues that were never in contemplation when the state of emergency was declared, when there was a lockdown. So you had more women who were facing all of these issues, and the numbers really did increase because nothing was done to help them. There was no way, it wasn't a priority. But even when you would call the helpline, it wasn't a focus area for people to go to help, go give you help. It's not a priority area, and as such, they would not send personnel over there to provide you with your menstrual support, to provide you with contraception or anything of the sort. Maybe some priority or focus was given to the pregnant women who are giving birth, but the biggest challenge is sometimes we have very hard to reach areas. And sometimes even when you call the line for support, it is so busy that, and in emergency situations like that, with child labor, you start looking at alternatives. The most women gave birth at home, and we already have a high rate of maternal mortality. We're going to have to look and assess that maternal mortality and see what it was like during the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Lawyer Fatimata. I think I have a follow-up question with regards to the helplines, but then I will direct this question to Chief Superintendent Owusu Acheme. Did we have available a helpline that people who were experiencing gender-based violence of any form could call other than the COVID-19 helpline? And I believe Diane K can also help us with regards to whether or not USA also had a helpline, not for COVID-19, but for gender-based violence, especially within the time of the lockdown. So I think Chief Superintendent Owusu Acheme, perhaps if you can help us with that.
Thank you very much. So during the lockdown period, there was a DOSU hotline It was relaunched around that time with support from UNFPA. And a lot of sensitization went on around that time during through social media. UNFPA, in collaboration with DOSU and other stakeholders, did a lot of sensitization using social media, educating the public on the new number, on the hotline, and also to draw people's attention to the fact that there is a possibility that there will be an increase in domestic violence. So there's a need for us to all, resist from it, or to be on the lookout for each other. And so, yes, there was. And during that time, during that period, within 1 month of relaunching the domestic violence, DOFSU domestic violence hotline, we recorded about 6,000 cases. And out of the 6,000 cases, we had only about 190 or so, around that, less than 200 cases that were directly linked to issues of domestic violence. And they were not linked to issues of domestic violence that were happening at the time of the restrictions, but they were issues of domestic violence that had happened in the past. And the rest of the numbers, the people, the callers, were all calling and asking for food, because around that time there were other numbers that had been given out. If you needed assistance, you could call that number. People were calling our numbers during that time. So yes, there was, we had about 6,000 calls coming in. Out of the 6,000, below
of the hotspots.
Below 200 were cases directly linked to domestic violence, which took place before the restrictions. The rest were mainly for assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more, how exactly were the sensitization done? Because perhaps one could say that the helpline that people could call when they experience
I'm
any
sorry,
form of
there was a
gender-based
break.
violence.
Sorry, there was a break.
Okay.
There was
Hello?
a break. So
can you hear me now?
Yes,
I can. Sure. Okay, so I was asking that one may say that perhaps there wasn't a surge with regards to reports on gender-based violence, especially within the pandemic period, i.e. the lockdown period, because there were basically restrictions. People couldn't go out to report instances of gender-based violence. But how exactly was the sensitization on the helplines made? How was it publicized to ensure that in as much as we are in the lockdown, where we're at home and we are not allowed to go anywhere, people were actually aware of these helplines and they could call?
I think the issue of people not reporting, I have answered it earlier on.
Yes.
You asked a question earlier on and I did answer. And I drew your attention to the fact that there has always been the issue that people do not report domestic violence cases, even in normal times. So it will be assumed that during restrictions, so the argument that because people did not report and we did not receive an increase in domestic violence cases because there were restrictions, it's not a strong argument to make. Why? Because one, during normal times, people do not report domestic violence cases anyway for various reasons. So within the lockdown period, we cannot say that because there were restrictions, that is why people could not come to report domestic violence cases. Of course, even after the restrictions, we are still recording cases, and we have not seen a remarkable increase or an increase. I wouldn't even say remarkable, but we are yet to see an increase even after the restrictions were lifted. That aside, in Ghana, our restrictions were not total lockdowns. It was just limited to areas, certain areas, Kasua, Kumasi, Tema areas. Now, a lot of people were going to work. I mean, most people could go to work, and those who sell in the market areas could go to the market and sell. People who, food vendors were still going out to sell food and all that. It was not a total lockdown. Total lockdown to the extent that you couldn't even go to work, because there were some areas in Europe where people couldn't just go to work. You have to stay indoors. And so based on that, there were outlets where people could go and complain. Apart from that, let us bear in mind that in Ghana here, most of our most people live, or an appreciable number of people live within compound houses, you know. So even if, unlike in Europe where it's more of like you are within it's a self-contained, you are within your apartment, you share nothing with anybody, you don't share anything with anybody. In Ghana, in some of the areas, you have people living in compound houses. So if there is, even people are making the argument that because of the lockdown, the partner would restrict the movement of the spouse, and as a result of that, the person will be unable to go out and report cases. Now, let's take a situation where, let's say, people are living in a compound house. You share common bathroom, you share common toilet. And so it's also an avenue for you when you go out to communicate in one way or the other to people that you needed help. That is even in the extreme cases. So we should take into consideration the fact that in our own environment, there were different dynamics that came to play that in one way or the other did not strictly restrict people to come to report. So people who did not come to report, there's a higher possibility that if they had been abused during the lockdown, during the normal times, they still wouldn't have come to lodge a complaint anyway. So that's one aspect. And then the other issue on how did we educate, sensitize the public. Before lockdown, there were a lot of sensitization going on. UNFPA does a lot of sensitization in schools, marketplaces. Those who also go out to do sensitization in churches, schools, marketplaces, organizations, and so on and so forth. So sensitization was ongoing, but during the restrictions period, it wasn't possible for us to do physical sensitization. So what was available to us was to use the social media. And on the average, a lot of people in Ghana will go on the internet, will go on Facebook, will go to certain websites, and also we use the media as well, television and newsprint and all that. So all available means of electronic media was used in trying to bring to the attention of the general public the existence of the DOSU hotline.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. Same question to Ms. Diane K. So being a student in the US, especially during this pandemic, are you aware of any helpline specifically for domestic violence cases or any form of gender-based violence situations where victims could call and then at least get some assistance other than the COVID-19 helplines?
Personally, I didn't see any of that, but then what I did see was that I saw women supporting each other. So there was this really innovative idea where, say it was mainly in the US that I saw this, that somebody's, for example, she's selling makeup and then she posts something and she's like, if you're going through domestic violence, text me and say maybe you want a foundation in this shade and let me know. So we will talk as if I'm about to deliver, like I'm going to get it delivered to you, and then I'm able to send the police people to your house. So that was an innovative way I saw that people were trying to mitigate the issue of domestic violence, because in the US, domestic violence cases increased by about 10%. So that means that there are about 1,400 new cases every single day since the lockdown. Because unlike in Ghana, where there was a lockdown, but there wasn't actually a lockdown, in the US, like you actually could not do much. Like you actually had to be in your house. And there was a lot of pent-up frustration. So it presented like a very beautiful situation for men to be abusing their wives. Like it was, domestic violence cases just skyrocketed. So I appreciated the fact that women realized this and tried to help each other by using innovative means, because the truth is that most women can actually come up and say that this is what is going on. Like they fear the fact that they may lose their sustenance, their life, like, you know, because domestic violence doesn't only affect rural women, but also high-ranking women, and they don't want it to come out that their husband, like, oh, I'm this lady, and my husband is doing this, my husband is doing that. So I felt like the way the makeup lady did it, where you just text them and be like, oh, I want this, and then she just instantly know what is wrong with you and be able to send the police to you, was like a really good way of combating the situation.
Okay, thank you very much. So other than basically other people or NGOs actually finding creative ways to help salvage the situation, you don't know of any actual government and law enforcing agencies that actually came out to give out helplines to help victims of domestic violence or any form of gender-based violence? Is that it?
No, I didn't see any of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for lawyer Isobel Afo-Mensah. Having been a founder of, as you say, a sort of a shelter and an initiative to help survivors of gender-based violence, can you give us any of the experiences that you have had, any interesting experiences with this, particularly within the period of COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think in our case, we did 2 rescues actually during the period. There was one emotional abuse case that came to us, which we sent to the DOFSU team for them to handle. And there was one physical abuse case, sort of a domestic violence case, which again, we worked with DOFSU to handle. So what we saw, and I really agree with what Chief Superintendent said, that we definitely expected to see more of an increase. I think what it led to was really people just having self-realization generally. And this is not just in domestic violence. I think this has been a period for people to actually stop and think more. And so we've seen some, marriages breaking down and people heading towards marriage breakdown. We've also seen some marriages being strengthened, right? So I think it's just been a time of realization for a lot of people. I agree that we haven't really seen the full impact of COVID. So we're now coming to the end of the year, which is really tough. People have managed to maybe make some savings stretch. Now you have this added issue with kids not really going back to schools in Ghana, and that additional pressure. They may be jobs which have tried to pay their staff even half salary for a period that may end, etc. Or things might come back to normal. So I think there's still a little bit of tension. I think on our part, we were in the final stages of fundraising for our safe haven, and our expectation was to open by June, July. So one of the big impacts for us is that we lost a lot of potential supporters, because these were the same people who had job issues and weren't able to support us, or they had businesses who had promised to give us a certain amount of money towards the construction of our safe haven and weren't able to honor those promises. And so I think it was just very, very difficult. It was a bit demoralizing for us because we couldn't really meet our targets. And it's really very difficult to fundraise in Ghana, but it was even more difficult because a lot of people were suffering, and there's this sort of panic in the country and elsewhere, not just in Ghana, because even if people have some jobs, they're starting to be very careful about how they use their money, because you're worried about job security, what's going to happen to the economy. We're also going to an election year, so there tends to be some slowdown, etc. And so we definitely had that effect. But as I said, we managed to do 2 rescues during the time. There was one lady who had been going through a lot of domestic abuse with her husband, and her husband ended up, in one of their fights, ended up cutting the leg of their young daughter. And so in this case, we rescued them and took the daughter to an orthopedic training center that we have a relationship with as well, because she now has one limb. It's a 2-year-old girl. So I think if anything, it's incentivized us to continue and to understand the need to do this work. But I think there's also been more of a realization, because there's a lot of issues elsewhere. There's been, in as much as we didn't get the money that we wanted to build, I think we've definitely had more women understanding that this is an issue and coming around and supporting each other and raising awareness. I think I've seen more awareness raising for this issue than in any other time. So that has been a positive aspect of the pandemic as well. Sorry, I can't really hear you, Sharon.
Hello, sorry, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yes, so I was asking that Ms. Diane Kay was talking about how someone came up with a really creative way of getting women to report cases of domestic violence or gender-based violence. And I wanted to find out from you, with regards to Pearl Safe Haven, how exactly do you get to know that someone is actually going through an instance of domestic violence or gender-based violence? How exactly do people report for it to get to your outfit?
So people actually go directly onto our website. So calls have come through the website, like there's a number on the website, texting that number, calling that number. But we also work closely with other civic societies. So in the case of the lady I mentioned, whose daughter's leg was cut off, we work with a group of queen mothers who work across Ghana. And so there's so many amazing, women and men in this sector. So they work in the villages, in these areas, and they have a network. And so that case, for example, came through the Queen Mothers Network, where the woman came to the Queen Mother, and then that was escalated to us so that we could help. In some instances as well, we've got direct, and then we've also had friends of friends. So in one case that we worked with Dovsu on, the lady, her friend knew a friend of mine. And so she contacted me directly to say, we've got the situation. And within 48 hours, we were able to rescue that woman with the support of the Dovsu team on the ground. And so I think when you look at the gender violence space, you have a lot of different actors. What we're trying to do better is coordinating, because everybody has a different role. Somebody like the Queen Mother may not have the role to house somebody, but they're the ones who are right on the ground and are able to actually bring effective change. Same with Dovsu. The Dovsu team are all over the big cities. And so making sure that we can coordinate with the Dovsu team makes things go quicker. We're also building a safe place mobile application that will be launched in the next few weeks in this month. And the mobile application is called Safe Place. That will enable people to also directly contact through the app to the Dovsu hotline and the police hotline. And again, it's an app that provides survivor stories and empowering stories. It has a directory of the different actors in the gender violence sector. It has a forum for discussion, because a lot of people as a lot of those panelists have said, are not free to share their stories. So a lot of women actually come out of a place of shame and silence when they actually hear other people's stories, or where they can anonymously share their stories and get counsel. So we'll have a forum, but what we're also building is a way to actually go through the app very discreetly to call DOFSU and Ghana Police. So that will be out later this month.
Wonderful. That's great news. Thank you so much, Lawyer Isobel. And with regards to the fact that some survivors may actually come out of some of these experiences with some sort of shame or some sort of psychological trauma, I have a question for Chief Superintendent Owusua. We may say that there's some sort of ongoing impunity. Let's perhaps zoom in into the cases of rape with regards to how rape victims are treated. I wouldn't want to conclude. I think you will be able to better tell us how that is being managed, because there are instances where rape victims, after they have even been through that ordeal, have to go to hospitals and they have to pay a huge amount as a fee to get some checks before they go to the police station to report what has happened. So how exactly has that narrative affected the reportage of these cases?
I don't know which one, because there are a lot of issues in one. So which one are you referring to affecting reporting of cases?
Okay, well, I believe the fee part is only sort of an example. So I'm only talking about the general ongoing impunity with regards to victims or survivors of rape, and how it may have affected reporting some of these things. Perhaps you will be able to tell us your experience with regard to the reports of especially rape cases in Ghana. Please,
Okay.
is it?
Okay. Okay, please, I'm listening.
Okay, so I was asking, is the line still breaking?
It's okay now. Now it's
Okay.
okay now.
So please, would you want me to repeat my question?
Okay, so let me try and answer. If I don't answer what you were asking, then you draw my attention because of the internet issue. So I'm not going to use the word impunity, because when you talk about impunity, it implies a lot of issues. So I am not going to go there, because impunity would mean, it's like there is no law with this regard, we don't care. And that's not the situation in this country. So the issue of impunity, no. But of course, even if it is one woman who is being raped, it's a huge issue, because rape shouldn't happen at all. Because raping somebody or defiling a child has to do with a person's personal security. So if as a human being, I'm unable to protect my personal security, then it's like I've lost everything. So yes, there is an issue of rape going on. I will not call it impunity, but we have laws, obviously, that take into consideration these things. And when rape victims report cases, it is taken up, investigations are done. If there is evidence, we go to court. If there is no evidence, we are unable to go to court. There are some challenges along the line. When you mentioned medical, going to the hospital, yes, going to the hospital is one way of gathering evidence. go into the area of law because we have what we call corroborative evidence. I don't want to go there because it's a whole area. I mean, under our laws, you can go to court based on only one witness, which is a complainant. So when you go to court, because under the Evidence Act section, I think section 7.3 or so, it talks about corroborative evidence not being a requirement unless it has been stated under a particular statute that corroboration is needed in a particular situation. In Ghana, we don't have that. So what it means, therefore, is that I can go to court. So for instance, a complainant who comes to court, who comes to the police report of rape, we can decide not to go to the court, the hospital, and go take caution statement, charge the suspect, and then arrange the suspect before court. The judge can make a ruling based on the two people the two evidence, which is the statement, the accused person statement and the complainant statement. We can go to court on that. It's a huge area. I don't want to go there. So, but for us, we think it will help us. And in a decided case in Ghana, it says that corroboration is desirable but not necessary. So what therefore it means that, when you have corroborative evidence, it helps you in building your case. And that is why for us police, we keep going back to the court because we want to make our case solid so that our chances of winning cases will be higher. So going to the hospital comes with its own challenges, which is having to pay hospital fee for the endorsement of the medical form. This has been a source of discouragement to a lot of people because most people are unable to afford that. And so when they go there, and it ranges, I think, between 100 to 200 to 800 Ghana cedis, and there've been different organizations, people are coming out to talk against this collection of endorsement fees by the doctors. We hope in the near future it will be resolved. But in the meantime, it is one of the things that hinder investigations into our rape cases. And because when we don't have it, it becomes difficult. Of course, we can go to court based on that, but then our chances of winning the cases become a bit, it becomes lower, in terms of percentage wise. So the issue of medical form is very crucial in gathering evidence on rape cases.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. That's very enlightening. Thank you. I believe lawyer Fatimata Sori can also help us with the challenges that Sierra Leone has also been facing with regards to the responsiveness of gender-based violence, particularly within the COVID-19 period.
So, the challenges are not unique to Sierra Leone. These are universal problems, even in developed nations. But ours more border on poverty. When there's poverty, the complainants are challenged with making reports and accessing the services. You also have to look at power. When the power dynamics at play, depending on who the perpetrator is, you might have difficulties or constraints in coming forward to even report, or even if you report, getting justice, because sometimes even the people in high offices or within the police are scared to actually pursue some of these offenders. We also have to look at what we do as a community. Sometimes when people come forward and complain, how we embrace them, what our reactions are, our facial reaction and our body language towards them. It also results in a situation where the people themselves don't want to come forward. But we have also a challenge with lack of access to services. When you look at the geographic layout of Sierra Leone as against the number of police stations that we have, you have communities where you would be difficult to access these services, even regular police services. And we also have the issue of confidentiality within our structures. Sometimes people go through these experiences, they hesitate to come forward to make a report because they're worried that their business become other people's business. That's because people, usually the human nature, they get involved and everybody else knows that you've been subjected to some form of violence. The other issue is lack of knowledge. Some people have been in homes where they have been constantly going through violence and they've never been enlightened enough or are aware that they should come forward. They usually look to their community leaders or, that help to resolve these issues, and it becomes a continuous situation. So these are all issues that we contend with. However, in the past, in this year, and even during the pandemic, we had the launch of the 116 hotline, which made room for reporting of rape and sexual penetration cases, as well as domestic violence. We've also unrolled 6 safe spaces and one-stop centers, so that because the target has been to alleviate economic burden on the victims and considering poverty, so that you don't have to be moving around to make sure you go to the police, go get medical in another area, go get legal services in another area, blah, blah, blah. So at some point when people have to weigh the options of survival because they need to eat as against seeking justice, they usually tend to lean towards survival. So it's to make the services, the environment to prevent or curb gender-based violence have to be friendly, economically, socially, and also the structures need to be across the country and easily accessible. The people have to be given power through knowledge. We also had passed a law last year which criminalized compromise and out-of-court settlements. And the penalty is 1 year in prison or 10 million fine, which is the equivalent to $1,000. We are yet to actually generate data on the number of cases that have come to court on these charges, and whether since the passing of that law, we've seen a reduction in the number. We actually haven't seen a reduction in the number because since 2019, when we had the state of emergency declared, we've seen more people feeling more confident to come forward and report on these cases because there's confidence that they would get the help. However, the prosecution process has been still slow. The number of convictions has been low. So we don't have the tools that we need to continue to fight to get people to come forward to tell them that justice will be swift, justice can be obtained without having gone through the economic crisis. So what we do at Lawyers is we provide pro bono legal services to victims and survivors of gender-based violence across the board, but only the female. So we are also biased. We focus on the female people, and we use whatever we generate as data for our advocacy platform for law and institutional reforms. So we noticed that with the lockdown and the state of emergency, there was a delay in, there was suspension of court sittings, and with suspension of court sittings, it meant that most cases would not be heard as urgently as was required. So we think that there's the need for some kind of online reporting mechanism, online court sessions, so that people can, for child support, for instance, and maintenance, which are some things that are easily resolved, that you can do them online. You don't need to have to go to court. You don't need to have to be in the police stations to get these things done. So we're looking at the effects of the pandemic to see how government can make improvements with respect to access to services and making sure some of these services are virtual.
Great, thank you so much. And to our panel, thank you so much. All too soon, well, our time is up. So I'd like to take your final words on the theme. So I'll start with Ms. Diane K. Your final words to our audience on the theme.
Thank you very much. When I saw the topic, I was happy about it because I feel like this is a conversation that we have. There's a conversation that happens a lot, but not a conversation that enough action is being backed with. And it's been really good to hear like Superintendent Usua and hear what Ghana is actually doing when it comes to domestic violence cases, hear how the issue is being combated in Sierra Leone, etc. So I find that this was actually not just talk, but seeing that action is actually being backed with the talk that we've been talking about. And I hope that this is a conversation that continues on and that we can all do our little to, continue to encourage people and continue to speak to people, because there's still people that think that's okay for husbands to be beating wives, and it's okay to be raped, and it's okay to be beaten, and it's not. So we should also do our bit as individuals to, dispel all these myths and incorrect narratives that are prevalent. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Diane K. Lawyer Isobel Afol-Mensah, your final words, please.
Firstly, yes, to commend you guys for talking about this subject, because it's not something, it's still sort of a taboo subject. And I think also for your age group, I think you guys have the opportunity to bring real change, and, really define your roles as men and women. So I'm really happy to see some male advocates as well. So it's important that we have these discussions. And I think it's also important that you support people. I think anyone can be a survivor of gender-based violence. I think sometimes we think, oh, it's because you're poor, or because you're in the village, or because you are, you made a mistake marrying this guy. It was obvious. And I think what I'd leave you with is really anyone can be a survivor. And so we should all be each other's keepers. There's so many women that we've had the privilege to work with who are shocked that they're in very abusive relationships. And it starts off with maybe a little bit of emotional, psychological bullying and grooming, and then it evolves. And so I think we should just all be conscious that, you can be a survivor. You may know somebody. If the statistics here are 1 in 3 women has experienced a form of gender violence, then 1 in 3 women that is a survivor, and 1 in 3 men is likely to be a perpetrator, right? So if you think like that, you should be more conscious about how we approach this subject, and also create a space so that survivors can actually share their stories without it being sensationalized or ridiculed or shamed. And I think we've got to become better as a society for people who've gone through these very difficult emotional, physical, or sexual abuse to really be able to come, talk about it, and heal. So well done for doing that. Well done for having a platform to actually have these discussions. And I, wish you guys all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lawyer Isobel. Chief Superintendent Owusu Achemi, would like to have your final words.
Okay, so I'd also like to add voice to what Madam Isobel just said, that just to congratulate you for a work well done, because through your forum, a lot of issues in this area will be brought to the attention of the general public. So well done, and congrats for taking up this work. And also to appeal to the general public that it's understandable that during this COVID-19 period, people will be going through emotional and psychological stress, especially because they've lost their jobs. It's a recipe for violence at home if it is not well managed. So I would like to encourage the general public that please let us exercise a lot of restraint during this period. If you think for one reason or the other, one partner has annoyed you or is abusing you in any way, in any form, please hold yourself, just leave the scene and report to the nearest police station. If there's a DOFSU office near you, please go. If there is no DOFSU office near you, please go to the nearest police station. In moments like this in anger, please leave. Just leave, because when you leave, it doesn't give the other person the power to continue to do whatever they do. That is if you have the opportunity to escape. But if you are unable to do so, please, when you are able to get the nearest opportunity to escape or to communicate to people, let them know. You can also call us on 0551 000 900. 0551 000 900. It's a DOFSU hotline. Let us stay safe and stay away from issues involving domestic violence. And please let us also observe the COVID-19 protocols so that we can protect each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Owusu-Akyereme. Would also like to take the final words of Lawyer Fatimata Sori.
Okay, so I think it's very good to see a woke generation where people want to get involved and get engaged and at speaking about these issues. I would love to see many more people go down to the people who need the education the most. But also not forget that we have people in our midst, within our calibers, within our class, within our groups, who are going through some form of violence, and we have to be able to create this space so that they feel comfortable and confident to speak with us. Because many a time we don't lend a shoulder to other people to tell us, and we don't build the confidence enough for them to feel safe. So we have to work towards building that safe space where your friends, your relatives can knock on your door and talk about these issues. I would also do injustice to my country if I fail to talk about the fact that there's a male engagement policy right now, because we believe this fight is just not a fight that has to do with women. It should not only be women's voices that need to be heard, but we need to get male engagement. And so it's being implemented. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 has slowed it down. But this is very much commendable. And the issue of gender-based violence is so vast, is so big, and the perpetrators are moving way ahead of us because we are sitting to have a conversation. These people are plotting and planning to commit an act. So we should find a way to accelerate and move ahead of them, because many of the things that we do are based on study of the past and not forecast of the future. So we realize that these people commit their offenses in different forms and in different kinds. So we should be challenging ourselves with the approach to future engagements, with the approach to future limitations, so that we catch them immediately. And we also need to engage our younger generation, younger folks and teenagers. Take this conversation to the schools, take this conversation to our prayer houses, get our religious leaders to make a statement. Find the right influencers within our societies to convey the messages. We also have to be mindful of the fact that in certain communities, local and otherwise, the message and the messenger are very crucial. The two go together. So if we really want to make an impact and make the necessary change that should create the necessary platform for growth of women and girls within our various societies, we have to target those groups. It is very crucial and key. Thank you so much for making me part of the conversation, and I look forward to hearing what you as ordinary people or as a group are doing to make the change in Ghana.
Thank you so much, Lawyer Fatimata, and thank you so much to my honorable panel for the opportunity to have such an enlightening conversation on the impacts of COVID-19 on women. Today, we've spoken so much about not only domestic violence, but also gender-based violence. I believe we would have many more opportunities to talk about equally important topics relating to gender-based violence. Thank you so much once again for joining us. It was a really wonderful and educating time speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Okay, so I will be handing over straight to my co-moderator, Maida Kluche, to take over the next session, which is your questions, so that our honorable panel can help us answer the mind-boggling questions that you have. So you feel free to put your questions down on the interface so that we can read them out to our panel, and then we can get the answers that we need. Over to you, Maida.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Tosu, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. It's been a very enlightening time. I believe we've learned a lot. We've understood so many things right now, and how COVID-19 has affected us as women and children. And on to the second session for this conference, we have about 2 questions so far. And all these questions have been directed to Chief Superintendent Owusu-Akyereme. So I'll take the first question from Lois. And she says there has been a growing concern among Ghanaians as to whether victims of domestic violence get some sort of benefit aside the law gunning down perpetrators, as in, do victims or survivors even get free medical and psychological treatment afterwards, since it was through no fault of theirs? or it's just about arresting culprits and leaving the victims to survive? So that's the first question from Miss Lois. So I believe Miss Uswa Chema will give us the answer to this question.
Okay, so please, my name is Tremen, not Chema. It's Tremen.
Oh, sorry, so sorry about that,
Okay.
Miss Chairman.
That's okay. Okay, so it's not just about arrest and police work. What happens is that as Isobel and other panelists mentioned earlier on, the fight against SGBV and domestic violence cannot be done by just one institution or one stakeholder. It involves a lot of stakeholders. We all have to, because it's a broad area and the needs of the victim includes a lot of things that cannot be provided by just one institution. So for instance, if you take Safe Haven, for instance, they are able to provide accommodation and some financial assistance, but they cannot investigate cases of domestic violence and prosecute them in court. And that's where we come in as police. Police, yes, it is possible that we can provide psychologists, but we don't have them in abundance across the country. And so what therefore it means is that we would then have to fall on other institutions, other individuals to provide psychological assistance to people, to survivors of domestic violence or SGBV. So what we normally do is that we go to, so when we have a survivor coming to us, we go through the normal police procedure, and then at a point in time, depending on what time the intervention is crucial or is needed, we will refer the person. So for instance, if we do rescue, we don't have a shelter for people we rescue. So then we'll have to look for shelter. So we get in touch with NGO, we can get in touch with Isobel to help us find shelter. And then we also get in touch with hospitals, NGOs like WISE to provide counseling for us. So no, it goes beyond that, beyond just arrest. It includes other things that the survivor needs. The only thing is that because we are not able to provide them directly, then we will fall on other people. Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. So Miss Ifiatema has a question for us because I see she has raised her hand. But before we go on, I want to acknowledge the presence of some faculty officials of the UPSA Law School. We have Madam. Thank you so much for making the time to be here with us, and we are grateful for your support. So Miss Tema had a
Hi, Sharon. I believe Maida is off. If you could take over.
I'm right here. So sorry for that. I'm having a bit of technical difficulties here. And so the second question from Samuel Jojo Asafoje, he's asking Chief Superintendent Owuswa, would you propose any legal reforms in aiding the fight against gender-based violence
Maida?
Please, was the question clear?
No, please.
All right, so sorry, let me read it again. So the question is, would you propose any legal reforms in aiding the fight against gender-based violence in Ghana?
Well, I think so far, what we need to do is to take a look at our Domestic Violence Act again, because, I mean, Domestic Violence Act, of course, we have the Criminal Offences Act that takes also addresses some forms of SGBV, but with the Domestic Violence Act, it's more like it restricts it to the offenses under the Domestic Violence Act is restricted to a domestic setting. And so for me, I think we should look at the various offenses under the Domestic Violence Act, because sometimes it becomes difficult to identify and also to collect evidence to support some of the offenses. I mean, for instance, when you look at emotional abuse, sexual abuse, it becomes a bit difficult. So maybe, and the way they are all grouped, like some of the offenses are grouped under one section, that's one subsection and all that. I think we should take a look at the Domestic Violence Act, and if we can even have an act that fully addresses all issues of SGBV instead of having them scattered all over, then it becomes easier. So maybe we look at the offenses, because sometimes when you look at the way the domestic violence is framed, it's a bit of a challenge. It looks like we have to maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say it was, I don't want to say it was maybe a rush, but I think because we were starting from nowhere, because we didn't have anything on domestic violence. Hitherto, you couldn't go to the police and say, my father has assaulted me. You couldn't go to the police hitherto to say, my husband has raped me, or yeah, I know. Or you couldn't say my husband has beaten me, but at least we have that law, so it's a good start. But I think we should revisit the law and take a look at and see what we can do. And also, we should state in black and white, of course, under the Domestic Violence Act, it stated that a survivor, a victim of domestic violence, is entitled to free medical care, but we still have doctors who charge for endorsement of medical fee. So maybe we should go back and look at the law and see how the victim can get total support when it comes to these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Superintendent Uswa. Thank you so much for these answers to our questions. All right, so all too soon we've come to the end, and I believe we have one final question from Alfred Ellie. But before then, we'd love to take our concluding remarks from Ms. Gertrude Ama. Ms. Gertrude Ama, so the concluding remarks for today's conference. All right, I've got one other question for lawyer Fatma Tasori. Sorry, for lawyer Fatma Tasori.
What's the question?
Yes, I'm going to read it out right now. So she says, what would be your assessment on the responsiveness to issues of domestic violence in Sierra Leone? This is from
I
Samuel.
responded to that. I responded to that on the text chat.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So sorry for the repetition. All right. So we will take our concluding remarks from Ms. Gertrude Armour. Ms. Gertrude Armour, give us the concluding remarks. I believe Ms. Gertrude is with us. All right. Yeah.
Hello, Sharon. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That
Yes.
was my
My apologies for the technical hitches. Yes. So I think it has been a very interesting discussion. I have personally learned a lot, and I'd like to commend and congratulate all our speakers for educating us in this manner. Now, I think that the issues that we have raised in this discussion are very pertinent matters that are worth, you know, it's worth having further discussions on them. So my advice to all of us is that we should continue to brood over these issues. Let us see how best we can bring some of these issues to the attention of the relevant stakeholders so that we can cause some relevant policy changes in issues that are affecting women within this COVID-19 era. So thank you all very much. And we are grateful once again to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Gertrude Armour.
All right. I think Maida is off again.
So all too soon, we've come to the end of today's webinar. The theme as we are on women globally. Today, we've had looking forward to another opportunity to have another fruitful discussion on equally salient topics that may be bordering specifically on women. And I had my co-moderator, Maida Kluche. I think she got lost somewhere because of the internet connection. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful time. A great thanks to our faculty members, Madam Gertrude Armour. God richly bless you. Thank you so much for being here. And to all of our great senior members, Madam Mavis Quenu. I saw her in there somewhere. Thank you so much for joining us. To our LSU President, Alfred, thank you so much. And of course, to our honorable panel, it was a really, really enlightening and educating time on this particular topic. We are hoping to see you once again on yet another equally important topic. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Sharon. Hello, Sharon. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, please.
Please, I think we should also acknowledge the presence of one of our senior members, Mrs. Ifya Isando. She's also here. I think her camera is not on, so we have not seen her. But Mrs. Isando, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mrs. Isando. It was really great having you all. Thank you very much, Madam Gertrude.
Okay, thank you all.
So God richly bless you, and we hope to see you same time on another date, for yet another enlightening time with the International Women's Conference organized by the UPSA Law Students Union, and of course the great collaboration with the African Law Human Rights Forum. Thank you so much once again.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.